I live in a two-story duplex, a split home with an upstairs and downstairs unit. My sister, Alina, stays on the ground floor, while I take the upper unit. She's rarely home, though always off at her boyfriend's place about 30 miles away. I'm 32. I shouldn't be afraid of being home alone, but sometimes I can't shake the feeling of unease. That night, I had the place to myself. It was late, and I was watching an old horror movie in my dimly lit living room. My unit has an open floor plan, meaning the living room, kitchen, and dining area are all one space. My couch sits in the center, facing the television, leaving a vast, empty area behind me. I've always hated sitting with my back exposed, especially in a dark house. My eyes kept flicking toward the shadowed corners, feeling as if something lurked just beyond the reach of the TV's glow. Every so often, I'd glance over my shoulder, feeling like I wasn't alone. Eventually, I turned off the TV, brushed my teeth, and checked that the doors were locked. Satisfied, I collapsed into bed, letting exhaustion pull me into sleep. I don't know how long I was out, but something jolted me awake. At first, I wasn't sure why I woke up. Then I heard it, Alina's voice. It was faint, but it was unmistakably hers, calling from downstairs. I lay there in the darkness, heart pounding, my mind sluggish with sleep. She wasn't supposed to be home. Maybe she had come back early? But something felt off. Her voice wasn't coming from outside, it was inside the house. I sat up, listening. Emile? My breath caught in my throat. She was calling my name, her voice drifting up the stairwell, muffled but clear. Still groggy, I threw off the blanket and stumbled out of bed. I switched on the hallway light, my pulse quickening as I moved toward the staircase. Alina, I called back. No response. The house was still. I hesitated, then started descending the stairs, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't define. The lower half of the house was shrouded in darkness, but I could still hear her voice. Emile. It was coming from her bedroom. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt profoundly wrong. I reached the bottom of the stairs, fumbling for the light switch in the foyer. My fingers brushed against the wall until I found it. The bulbs flickered to life, dim at first, before filling the space with warm light. Her small living room was empty. The kitchen, too. I stepped toward her bedroom, the door slightly ajar. My breath hitched. The bed was empty, the sheets still perfectly smooth, untouched. Alina. My voice barely came out. Silence. Then a thump. A dull, heavy sound from inside the room. I froze. I had just walked in there. It was empty. Something had moved. A sharp, cold dread curled around my stomach. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stared at the empty bed, my mind racing. Then, the closet door creaked open. The breath hitched in my throat. A dark gap yawned between the door and the frame, revealing nothing but blackness inside. A shape shifted in the dark. I ran. I bolted up the stairs, heart hammering so violently I thought it might explode. I reached my bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. Hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and called Alina. The phone rang. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I sat there, locked in my room, my back pressed against the door, waiting for anything to happen. My mind churned, trying to rationalize what I had just experienced. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I was dreaming. But I had heard her voice. I had heard something move. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Alina. Why did you call me so many times last night? I was at Damien's. Everything okay? A shiver crawled up my spine. I swallowed and texted her back. You weren't home. She replied almost instantly. No. Why? I didn't answer. I forced myself to go back downstairs, dreading what I might find. I stood at the threshold of her bedroom, my pulse hammering in my ears. Everything looked normal. No open closet. No sign of anything out of place. But I knew what I had heard. I stepped inside, glancing around, my skin crawling with unease. I half expected to hear that voice again. But there was nothing. I turned to leave, but as I did, something made me stop. The closet door was slightly ajar. And on the floor, just inside the gap, was something that hadn't been there the night before. A single footprint, pressed into the carpet. It wasn't mine, and it definitely wasn't Alina's. I shut the door and left, locking it behind me. Some things are better left undisturbed. Story 2. The house had been in my family for generations. A small, two-story home, old but well-kept, sitting at the end of a long, empty road just outside of town. It had a wraparound porch, the kind you'd see in a postcard, with an old wooden swing that creaked in the wind. It was the perfect house for my mother, my younger brother David, and me, until it wasn't. I was 15 when it happened. That night, my mother was working late at the hospital, leaving me home alone. She was an ER nurse, always on call, always coming and going at strange hours. My younger brother, David, was away at a friend's house, which meant I had the place to myself. It was a Friday night, and I had invited Lila over, this girl I had been seeing. We weren't officially dating, but there was something there, something electric and exciting in the way only teenage crushes could be. She stayed for a few hours, watching old movies with me in the dim glow of the television, her laughter filling the otherwise empty house. Eventually, around 11, she had to leave. Her dad was strict, and she wasn't allowed to stay out late. I walked her to the door, watching her disappear into the night as she hopped into her mom's car, waving goodbye. Then I was alone. I locked the door behind me and headed upstairs to my bedroom. The house was eerily silent now, the only sound the occasional groan of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. I turned on the TV in my room, letting the familiar noise drown out the quiet. Maybe an hour passed before I heard it. A sound from outside. A long, scraping noise. I muted the TV, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Another scrape. I stood up and moved to my window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. My room overlooked the backyard and the wooden deck below, and that's when I saw him. A man sitting on the deck chair, staring up at my window. I froze. The moon cast just enough light to make out his shape, his hunched posture, his hands resting on his knees as if he had been waiting for me to notice him. I squinted, trying to make out his face, but the shadows swallowed his features. He didn't move. For a long moment, neither did I. Then, very slowly, he lifted his head. My breath hitched. I stepped back from the window, my stomach twisting into a knot. I grabbed my phone and texted Lila, my fingers shaking. "Did you see anyone outside when you left?" She responded almost immediately. "No." "Why?" I didn't answer. I glanced back toward the window, heart hammering, and forced myself to peek outside again. He was still there, still looking up. I swallowed, my throat dry. For a split second, I considered opening the window and asking what he wanted, but every part of me screamed no. Instead, I moved away, flicked off my TV, and crept toward my bedroom door. I wanted to believe it was some dumb prank, maybe a neighbor messing with me, maybe a drunk who wandered onto the wrong property. But deep down, I knew better. I stepped out into the hallway, my socked feet silent against the wooden floor. The house was dark now, except for the faint glow of the moon through the windows. Then I heard it again, the scraping sound, but this time it wasn't outside. It was at the back door. I tiptoed down the staircase, moving as quietly as possible, my breath shallow. The back door had a glass panel, allowing me to see just enough without being seen. I inched closer. The man was standing there now, his hand pressed against the glass. Too close. He was tall, his face obscured by the shadows. His breath fogged against the glass as he exhaled, slow and steady. My chest tightened. He tilted his head, as if listening. Then, suddenly, he knocked. A single, deliberate tap. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Should I turn on the lights? Should I scream? My fingers hovered over my phone, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, paralyzed. Then he did something that sent ice through my veins. He smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was wrong, too wide, too forced, his lips stretching in an unnatural way. My stomach twisted in terror. Then he did something worse. He whispered. I couldn't hear what he said, but his lips moved, forming words I couldn't understand. Then, without warning, he stepped back into the darkness. I stood there, heart pounding in my throat, straining to hear anything. But there was nothing. The backyard was empty. I waited, muscles tense, expecting him to reappear. But he didn't. I crept back upstairs, phone in hand, my mind reeling. I wanted to believe it was over, that he had left. But then I heard it. A sound I will never forget. The creak of my front porch steps. My front porch. I barely had time to react before something pounded against the front door. 3 hard, heavy knocks that rattled the frame. I staggered backward, my legs trembling. Then silence. I stood there, my breath shallow, straining to hear. Then my phone vibrated in my hand. A text. From an unknown number. I hesitated, staring at the screen, dread pooling in my stomach. The message was short. I see you. I dropped the phone. My hands trembled as I reached for the lock. double-checking it was secure. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the silence returned. I stayed awake until dawn, waiting for another knock, another sound, another sign that he was still out there. But nothing came. By morning, he was gone. I never found out who he was. There were no footprints, no sign of forced entry. Just an empty porch and an unlocked gate that I knew had been latched the night before. My mother brushed it off as a bad prank. The police didn't take it seriously. But I knew. I knew he would come back. And one night, when I least expect it, he will. Story 3. I was 12 the night it happened. My parents had rushed out in a panic after getting a call from the hospital. My older brother had been hit by a car. It was nothing fatal, just a broken leg, but my mother was hysterical, and my father was focused on getting to the hospital as quickly as possible. I remember my mother asking, almost as an afterthought, "Are you okay staying home alone?" I had nodded. It wasn't the first time. Besides, I didn't want to see my brother in a hospital bed. And so, I was left alone. At first, I didn't mind. I went in my room, played video games, and tried to distract myself. The house felt emptier than usual, but I kept telling myself that it was fine. I had been alone before. Then, maybe an hour later, I heard it. The front door. A slow, creaking sound, followed by the faintest tap of footsteps. I froze, gripping my controller tightly, my body turning rigid. Mom? Dad? Maybe they had forgotten something? I turned off the TV and listened. Silence. Then, after a long, agonizing pause, another step. I swallowed hard. My bedroom door was closed, but I had a perfect view of the dark hallway through the small gap beneath it. Then, suddenly, a shadow moved past. My blood ran cold. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure they would hear it. I wanted to tell myself that maybe I imagined it, that it was just the glow from outside shifting against the walls. But then I heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, just outside my door. Someone was there. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stayed frozen, waiting. Then, the doorknob rattled. Panic exploded in my chest. The door was locked, but that didn't matter. They knew I was in there. I could feel them standing just beyond the thin wooden barrier. I scrambled off my bed and backed away, my legs weak beneath me. My phone was across the room, charging. I couldn't reach it. I couldn't call for help. Then, the door creaked open. I had locked it. But it didn't matter. The door eased open an inch, then another, then another. A sliver of darkness, a pale hand against the frame. I ran, not toward the door, but toward my closet. I threw myself inside and buried deep behind old clothes, pressing myself against the wall. The door to my bedroom groaned as it opened fully. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was in my room. My pulse pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I could hear my own breath, uneven and quick. I forced myself to stay still, to hold my breath. The closet door didn't open. Instead, I heard the shuffling of feet near my bed, the rustling of blankets, the faint sound of my dresser drawer being pulled open. They were searching. For what? I didn't know. Then, another voice. A second person. "She's not here," a deep voice muttered. I was a boy. Whoever they weren't looking for me. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Footsteps moved toward the hallway. "Check the rest of the house," one of them said. Then they were gone. I waited. I don't know how long. Minutes. Maybe longer. I wanted to believe they had left, that they had realized no one was home and had simply given up. But then I heard the footsteps on the stairs. They weren't leaving. They were still searching. My lungs burned from holding my breath. I shifted, just slightly, and my elbow knocked against something, a metal hanger. It clattered softly against the closet wall. I froze. Everything went silent. The house, the air, the space around me. Then footsteps. Coming back. No. I shut my eyes, praying, waiting for the closet door to be ripped open. But it didn't happen. Instead, I heard a low whisper. "She's hiding." I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Then, a sound I will never forget. The front door slammed. It shook the house. The intruders ran. I heard them scrambling down the stairs, their footsteps a frantic thundering. The door banged against the wall as they fled into the night. Then nothing. I stayed in the closet until I heard my parents return. They found the front door ajar, several drawers ransacked, but nothing missing. I tried to tell them what had happened, but my voice felt distant, unreal. I kept thinking about what they had said. She's not here. They had been looking for someone else. Or at least, that's what I desperately wanted to believe. Because the alternative? They had been looking for me.